It's 6 p.m. on a Wednesday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let us begin with the headlines. President Park Geun-hye at the ASEAN summit works to drum up support from other nations to up the pressure on Pyongyang. She's expected to discuss the issue with her Japanese counterpart in one-on-one talks as well. The UN Security Council adopts a statement condemning North Korea's latest missile launch, taking just 4 hours to reach an agreement. A bankruptcy court in the U.S. has approved Hanjin for temporary bankruptcy protection in that country, but the shipping giant's expected to need over $500 million more to unload all of its cargo and pay its overdue bills. Let's begin in Laos, where President Park Geun-hye is taking part in this year's ASEAN summit. She will also attend a series of multilateral summits, including a sit-down with the Japanese Prime Minister, focusing on North Korea's nuclear threats. Song Ji-sun in Vientiane has our top story.
On the final day of 2015, ASEAN member nations officially launched the ASEAN community in a bid to strengthen synergy and collaboration in the region. At this year's meeting, South Korea will seek to revive cooperation with the massive economic bloc, a region with a combined GDP of $2.5 trillion and home to 630 million people.
At the ASEAN summit, Seoul will seek to reinforce cooperation with the ASEAN community. And at the ASEAN Plus 3 summit, the 10 ASEAN member countries, plus the leaders of South Korea, Japan and China, will review their achievements over the past year and discuss future cooperation.
President Park will also use the chance to win greater support from the international community to press North Korea with its nuclear and missile provocations. After a summit on Tuesday with U.S. President Barack Obama, where the two leaders vowed to counter North Korean threats with all possible measures, President Park will now discuss the North Korean issue with her Japanese counterpart, Shinzo Abe.
At their second bilateral summit this year, President Park and Prime Minister Abe will center their focus on the North Korean nuclear issue and ways to develop bilateral relations and cooperation.
Following talks with Abe, President Park will have completed a series of bilateral talks with Russia, China, the US, and Japan. The leaders will all gather at the East Asia Summit on Thursday to further discuss regional security. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Vientiane.
The UN Security Council has spoken with one voice, strongly condemning North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches. The Council says the launches were a grave violation of the nation's international obligations and vowed further action if threats continue. For details, let's turn to Kwon So-hwa.
The members of the Security Council strongly condemned the ballistic missile launches conducted by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on 5 September 2016.
4 hours was all it took for the UN Security Council to unanimously adopt a press statement against North Korea's recent violations, namely its launch on Monday of 3 medium-range ballistic missiles off its east coast. Issued just 11 days after a statement on Pyongyang's recent submarine-launched ballistic missile test, the new statement says all members are deeply concerned about the launches that were carried out in flagrant disregard of its demands. That China, North Korea's only major ally, did not hesitate giving its approval is said to be related to the timing of the provocation.
This launch, which I would note took place while China was hosting the G20 summit, once again shows the DPRK's blatant disregard for its international obligations.
The deputy chief of South Korea's mission to the UN said the international community should send a clear and unequivocal message to North Korea.
If they continue to provoke and violate the international commitment and sanctions, they will face much stronger and insurmountable and significant countermeasures.
If North Korea stays on its current path, it could face even tougher punitive measures than the strongest UN sanctions to date, which were imposed on the regime after its 4th nuclear test in January. South Korea has welcomed the statement, saying it shows the UNSC's united will to bring about change in North Korea, and that Seoul will continue its diplomatic efforts for the thorough implementation of UN sanctions on the regime. North Korea, in the meantime, appears to be making its own attempt at diplomacy. Local media outlets report the North's Deputy Director for North American Affairs, also a nuclear envoy of the regime, embarked on Wednesday for Beijing. While the trip's purpose is not clear, pundits say it may be to call on China to let up on the pressure regarding sanctions. 권소아, 아리랑 뉴스.
Staying with North Korea's missile launches during the G20 summit, judging by the timing, the act is widely being viewed as a ploy for attention from the international community, but clearly there are visible progress in their missile technologies. Kim Yeon-bin tells us more.
In a photo released on Tuesday, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his military commanders are looking at an operations map showing the missile's flight path. The missiles landed in Japan's air defense identification zone after flying around 1,000 kilometers. Experts say they were Scud-ER missiles, which have a range of about that distance.
Looking at pictures and intelligence information, it's believed that North Korea fired Scud-ER missiles and that their accuracy has increased tremendously. When fired simultaneously, they can be difficult to intercept with the THAAD and SM-3 missile defense systems.
Yang said the recent missile enhancement will become a grave threat not only to South Korea, but even to Japan. Japan's Sankei Shimbun reported on Tuesday that Tokyo is looking into enhancing its missile defense system, as its current SM-3 and PAC-3 anti-missile system can only cover part of the country.
Most military targets in Japan are in range of missiles like the latest one. North Korea has a limited number of Rodong launch pads, but has plenty of Scud launchers which can be fired simultaneously. This will become a grave threat to Japan as well.
U.S. forces stationed in Japan will be the first to be deployed in case of a crisis on the Korean peninsula, before the main reinforcements from the U.S. and the international community arrive. Many experts believe Scud-ER missile could be armed with a nuclear warhead and fire from a mobile launcher, making it difficult to track beforehand. Experts say North Korea will continue to enhance its missiles and nuclear weapons as the only negotiating tools the regime has to prolong its survival. Kim Yeon-bin, Aria News.
Going back to South Korea's domestic political arena, it was the People's Party's turn to address the parliament during its newly opened regular session. Front and center in the interim party leader's policy address were national security and North Korea issues. Kim Young-gil highlights the minor opposition bloc's goals.
The interim leader of the People's Party, Park Ji-won, demanded that the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system, THAAD, on South Korean soil should be discussed in parliament.
The controversies surrounding THAAD should be brought to the table in the Assembly. The government should submit a motion to Parliament on the stationing of THAAD.
The ruling to North Korea, which he argued would also help South Korea.
I propose sending rice and Jeju tangerines to North Korea. We'll be able to help alleviate the food shortages in the north while improving inter-Korean relations. It could help South Korean farmers too.
Continued big harvests in South Korea have resulted in falling prices for rice, causing difficulties for farmers. Park argued that South Korea could cut down the surplus by giving away some of the rice, while at the same time encouraging a more peaceful mood on the peninsula. The interim leader also proposed that the Assembly set up a special committee on judicial reform to discuss ways to reform the prosecution after a series of corruption scandals involving former and sitting high-ranking prosecutors and judges. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The National Assembly's House Steering Committee has decided to call in a total of 72 witnesses in its annual audit of government agencies, including a top presidential aide involved in multiple corruption scandals. It's an open question whether the Senior Secretary for Civil Affairs, Woo Byung-woo, will show up or not, as previous practice tolerated the absence of presidential aides. The political parties are split on the issue. The ruling Assembly wants Woo to skip the audit as it's under investigation. The opposition urged him to show up and explain some of the corruption allegations. The scandals involving Secretary Woo include allegedly providing secret legal counsel for jailed businessmen and asking an online gaming company to buy real estate owned by his in-laws. The parliamentary audit is set to get underway on October 21st. South Korea's prosecutors have formed a special team to investigate one of their own who is accused of taking bribes. Park Ji-won has more on the nation's efforts to eradicate corruption.
The nation's prosecutors have launched a special inspection team to look into allegations that a chief prosecutor accepted money and lavish entertainment in return for influence. The Supreme Prosecutor's Office said Wednesday that it formed a special inspection team consisting of 4 prosecutors and 10 investigation officers to swiftly get to the bottom of the case. The team will be led by